Hello everyone and welcome back to the PogChamps Championship. I'm just kidding. Welcome to Chessable Masters. This is the first game we'll be showing, and it's a third leg of the Magnus Invitational, which is of the Magnus Chess Tour, which is a $1 million tournament, and this is the third event. So it's 12 of the world's strongest players. They will be brawling it out first in the preliminaries, where everyone will face off against everyone in their own group, and then we go to the knockout stages of the tournament. But we're going to go through that after we cover some games. Now, first game we're going to show is Pentala Harikrishna versus Magnus Carlsen. Really already a thriller. And before we check out the game, just two very small announcements. Agadmator made a new video, so if you haven't seen it, do check it out. It will be the first link in the description below, sort of a compilation of some weird moments on the channel that are, well, some are funny, some are just weird, but do check it out if you haven't seen it. And also, second thing, I would like to congratulate Yozarov's chess channel on reaching 10,000 subscribers. There you have it. Yesterday on my stream, he played a game against Temur Rajabov, and it was quite the game. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. He made an analysis of the game. I will put a link to it also in the description below. Will be the second link you will see, so check it out if you haven't. Now, getting back to the game, Harikrishna with the white pieces opens with e4, and like 95% of the times when you play against Magnus, that means we are going to have a Sicilian on the board. So c5 by Magnus, and yeah, Justin, this is the first game we're covering. The format of the tournament is 15 minutes per player, and already you have a 10-second increment starting from move 1. So every move 10 seconds you get an increment. So knight f3, we have knight to c6, sorry about that. And now you strike in the center with d4. So just normal stuff, captures, and now knight to f6. We have knight to c3, and of course Magnus goes for his e5, the Pelikan, the Lasker Sicilian, the Sveshnikov Sicilian, whatever you call it nowadays. Knight b to d5, and now d6, just preventing knight to d6 check. We have bishop to g5, and here a6 by Magnus. So all very standard, and the opening is a very long theoretical struggle. So now here you go, either you go back or you capture here. You cannot capture with the queen because of knight c7 check picks up the rook, but black is very happy to capture with the g pawn here. You would then have a nice advancement to f5. So knight back to a3. Considered the strongest. We have b5 now, threatening b4 to win one of the knights, and now knight to d5. So still very standard stuff. We have bishop to e7, and now bishop captures on f6. The most played move here, bishop captures, and c4. Now, I did some studying on the Sveshnikov, and usually black doesn't really gain anything by advancing the pawn to b4, as white will be very happy in shifting this knight over to e3, and from there you will again have access to d5 and to f5. However, every position is different, so here it could be okay. So here b4, we have knight to c2 with the idea of shifting the knight to e3, and now a5 as the b4 pawn is attacked twice for the moment. So a5 and now g3, preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop. We have g6, Magnus wants to tuck back his bishop into g7, and now Harikrishna just grabs it. So knight captures, we have queen captures, and bishop to g2. Now both players castle to safety. We have castles by Magnus, castles by Harikrishna, and bishop to b7. Also, I heard that they call sometimes Harikrishna Hurricane Harry. If anyone can confirm that, I would be very happy. And here, queen to d2. We have knight to b8 now. Knight to b8 with the idea of shifting the knight over to c5, and from c5 you will put a lot of pressure on e4, and since the bishop already attacks c4, could be very good for black. Also, white might have to weaken further his king side by playing f3. And here there is one game where knight to e3 was played with the plain idea of just bringing the knight to d5. However, here Harikrishna plays rook f to d1, and it is already as of move 18 that we have a completely new game. So calling this game a theoretical struggle would definitely be an understatement. But yeah, new move, rook f to d1, and now you're threatening to pick up Carlsen's d6 pawn, which is definitely a weak pawn. It's a backwards pawn, you cannot advance it. These two guys are, preventing it from moving forward. And rook to a6, Magnus just defends on d6. We have queen to e3. Queen to e3 is the top move recommended by the engine. Definitely some preparation, this rook after d1 followed by queen to e3. And might be with an idea of maybe doubling rooks here on the d file, but other than that, I don't really have a good explanation on queen to e3, other than that it's the top move recommended by the engine. And Magnus continues shifting his knight over to c5. So knight to d7, and now a3 by Harikrishna, putting pressure on the b4 pawn. So Carlsen has to react to this. He defends it with rook to b6, and we have captures here. So captures, and now rook to a4, again with a double attack here on the pawn. And now Magnus goes for b3. It's a good move if it works. However, if it doesn't, then it could be a liability if you will be able to defend this pawn. So Harikrishna goes back, knight to e1, and now knight to c5, putting pressure on the rook and also on the pawn here. We have rook to a3, and now rook to a6, again challenging this rook. So here Harikrishna trades. We have rook captures on a6, bishop captures, and now bishop to f1. And bishop to f1 is an extremely strong move. It's not an invitation to a repetition like bishop b7 followed by bishop g2, bishop back to a6, bishop back to f1, but rather if black persists with this to go after the e4 pawn, Harikrishna had knight to d3 in mind. And the point is, if you go after the pawn with knight captures on e4, then bishop g2 pins the knight. And after you defend it, queen f5, now rook to e1, you add another attacker, and now the knight has to go back, knight to c5, and now you trade everything off. Knight captures, you're going to get bishop captures on g2, king captures, d captures on c5, and here white will be able to choose which pawn he fancies most and grab at least one of them. So that's why you cannot go for the pawn with this, nor ask for some sort of a threefold repetition. So rook back to c8. When the knight moves, you will put more pressure on the c4 pawn, and now knight to f3. The knight can now come to d2 and put more pressure on the b3 pawn while adding more defense to the c4 pawn. So bishop back to b7, now Magnus goes for the e4 pawn, and knight to d2 now, defending this, and also attacking on b3. So bishop to c6, Magnus knows that at some point this rook can come to a3 to add a third attacker to the pawn, and he wants to be able to defend it with bishop to a4. So here, if you go for the pawn right away with knight captures here, the problem is bishop to a4 also pins the knight, and you will have a lot of problems here. You will not be able to withstand this pressure. So Harikrishna goes to rook to a1. Now you will not have any rook to a4 pinning tricks. And now rook to b8. Magnus defends the b3 pawn once again. And now rook to a3. Harikrishna goes after the pawn. And now how do you defend it? It's not at all clear. Thing is, you cannot defend it. You have to play something else, like king to g7. And now the point is, if you go after the pawn, let's say with the knight captures on b3, then you've weakened the e4 pawn. So you basically defend it by waiting, and if one of the attackers attacks it, then you can win the e4 pawn. However, Magnus decided to defend it with bishop to a4, and we've reached the position from the thumbnail, which usually means that something very magical happens here. Now, what is happening here? What's the idea behind bishop to a4? The idea is that Harikrishna has a brilliant move here that could help him win the game. However, you have to help him by pausing the video and finding the best move in the position, while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting that you can win the two pieces for the rook. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook captures on a4. Thing is, after knight captures, which is the only move, you then have queen to a7 with a double attack on the rook and on the knight. Sorry if I'm missing the arrows lately. Something seems to be off with the mouse. I think I'm going to have to get a new mouse. But yeah, with a double attack here, and you will now win the knight. And of course, if rook defends it with rook to b4, queen to a5 again forces it back, and then you will pick up the knight. You're up. You have two pieces for the rook, which is in a position like this should be winning. Since this is still a weak pawn, it's a backwards pawn, you will easily be able to even go after this pawn, so not really a problem there. And then once these two pawns start marching forward, should be a fairly straightforward win. However, Harikrishna here went for h4. And Magnus blocked h5 by playing h5 himself. He decided to block this idea, so h5, and now again, rook captures on a4 is in the position, but now bishop to e2. And now after bishop to e2, it's no longer in the position. Here we have king to g7. by Magnus, and now the reason why this is no longer in the position is exactly because the bishop is on e2. For example, if you go for this now, captures, captures, and captures, then black has this insane move, knight to c3, which offers the knight to start pushing the passed pawn here. And also, if you just capture the rook, let's say queen captures on b8, then you just capture this guy with check, and black just will be able to get a threefold repetition. For example, if king g2, knight f4 check opens up the king, and will be able to force a repetition. Or if king moves, you can then go knight to d3 to go after the b2 pawn. But here, basically, if you capture, then queen captures, now attacks the knight, and after the knight moves somewhere to help out with the defense of the king, then you can check here with capture, king g1, queen g4 check, and if you block with the knight, only then do you capture on c4, defend this pawn, prepare this check, followed by captures here, you create a passed pawn, and so on. So very, very dangerous. And another interesting thing, after this captures, captures, and queen to a7, after knight to c3, you could also just capture the knight. It is also possible, but then black has queen to d8, and now you will push your passed pawn, and it's even if it's playable, it's impossible to calculate this. Let's say bishop d3 guards the queening square, and now who knows what can happen here. Let's say you go after the queen, queen b7, rook a1 check, king has to move, or you can block the rook by also covering the queening square, and now who knows what's happening here. So it's a rapid game, a bit too much to even try something like this. So knight to b1 by Harikrishna, and now comes queen back to d8. So Magnus brings the queen back and also prepares just rook to a8. The queen needs to guard the rook on a8. So knight back to d2, again puts pressure on the b3 pawn, and now rook to a8, now preparing to move the bishop. So king h2, and now knight to e6. Again, now the knight might come to d4. From there, the knight will be extremely strong. So knight f3, guarding the d4 square twice. And now bishop to c6. Again, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. And also, if the rooks are traded off, which you should definitely do. If you allow this, then black gets a nice passed pawn, so you shouldn't allow it. So rook captures on a8, and queen captures. Now, not allowing any well, you're basically offering the b3 pawn for the e4 pawn. And unless you want to go back with something like knight to d2 to guard the e4 pawn and allow an infiltration with queen to a1, then you allow the trade. So this is what Harikrishna does. Queen captures on b3, we have bishop captures on e4, and now we have queen back to e3. You cannot try something else because the queen and bishop are attacking the knight here, so the queen has to keep defending. So queen back to e3, and now just bishop back to b7. And now you could try b4, b5, let's say try and, well, push your passed pawn. It's what passed pawns are for. However, Harikrishna plays c5, and it does make sense. If this captures, then you have queen captures on e5 with check, and if the knight captures, which is what happened in the game, then Harikrishna goes for knight captures on e5, with the idea that if pawn captures, then you can just capture with check and win back your piece. However, Magnus had something else in mind here, so feel free to pause the video once again and try to find Carlsen's idea here while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding a beautiful Zwischenzug. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's queen to a1, the strongest of in-between moves, as it comes with the threat of checkmate. The bishop and queen are nicely connecting on h1, so you have to defend this. And if you defend with a weird move, then you will just lose this knight here. So knight back to f3, and now comes queen captures on b2. Magnus wins back his pawn. And now he's also up a pawn, and it's a passed d pawn, which is a very dangerous pawn. So here, knight to g5. Now Harikrishna will try to go after the f7 pawn, and bishop to d5, immediately adding another defender. So bishop f3. We have bishop captures by Magnus, queen captures, and now as the f7 pawn is under attack, queen to f6, immediately Magnus offers to trade down into a knight and pawn endgame, as he is up a pawn, and he is very confident in his endgame skills. As he should be, he is the world champion. So queen back to e3, avoiding the trade of course, and now knight to e6, offering more trades, which Harikrishna declines. So knight to f3, and now queen to f5. Just grabbing more space. Maybe you can start advancing your passed pawn now. So king g2, now the queen can move as the knight is defended, and now queen to d5, again pinning the knight with ideas of maybe trading off. So king back to g1, unpinning, and now king f6, shifting the king over to e7. We have queen c3 check, king to e7, and now queen back to e3, pinning the knight. However, queen to c5. Again, Magnus offers a queen trade. We have queen to d3, not accepting this, and now queen to c1 check. King g2 and queen to c6. Again, pinning the knight here. So king g1. Harikrishna, of course, very happy with a draw now. He's down a pawn, and, well, both players are very low on time. So knight to c5, attacking the queen, preparing to maybe bring the knight closer. And now queen e3 check. We have queen to e4, again offering a queen trade, and again Harikrishna has to decline. Queen c3, we have knight to e6 check, and now queen to a3, pinning the pawn, so you cannot start pushing it. King to e8, unpinning, now with the idea that if queen captures, you just lose the knight, since the knight is undefended. So king g2, and now comes g5, a very strong idea. Point is, if you go for something like this to put more pressure on the knight here, then the problem is you have queen to a4 check and you lose the knight. So you, sorry, that's a bad arrow. And you lose the knight, so you have to be careful for ideas like this. So Magnus finds the very interesting g5. Now, if queen captures, just, well, we can even show it. G4 attacks the pin piece and, of course, just wins the game. So after g5, we have king to g1. Again, unpinning, and now g4 pushes the knight back. We have knight to g5, and now finally Magnus gets the trade of the knight. So captures, captures, and now queen to e1 with check. Now it's a queen and pawn endgame, which is one of the most difficult endgames to play, regardless if you're up a pawn or down a pawn. So queen e1 check, king to g2, or now queen back to e5 with check, defending and also attacking this. However, it's more likely that you will go after this pawn with the king. So queen a8 check, sorry about that, queen a8 check, we have king to e7, and now queen to g8, trying to keep an eye on the g5 pawn. Now queen e4 check, king to g1, and now queen to g6. You have to force the white queen away from that pawn. So queen to c8, and now queen to b1 with check. Not going for this capture right away, then to allow some checks with queen to c7. First, Magnus goes for queen to b1 check, king to h2, and now queen to b6, guarding this pawn. And now he wants to advance this pawn to this pawn with the king. So king back to g2, and now queen to c5, again offering a queen trade, but basically forcing the white queen to move. Queen to g8, and now queen to f5, again just getting the optimal square for your queen. We have queen back to b8, and now queen to e4 check again. Sorry, that's not queen to e4 check again, king to g1, and now d5. Finally, you get the pawn push. Otherwise, you might run into a 50 move rule, as we haven't captured a piece or moved a pawn. So d5, very nice. Now the 50 move rule starts all over again. We have queen to c7 with check, king f8, and now queen to d8 with check. We have king to g7, and now queen to f6 with check. So king to g8, you have to play this to reach safety on h7. So queen back to d8 check, king h7, and now queen to f6, threatening to win the pawn. But now queen to g6. And yes, queen and pawn endgames are this difficult. We have queen back to f4 now, guarding the g5 pawn, but now queen to e6. We have queen to d4, and now finally king to g6, and here you go after the pawn. And here, a very interesting decision by Harikrishna. He gives up the pawn right away, and it's the correct decision, because if you try queen f4 to keep an eye on the pawn, a problem is, well, queen to e1 check is a very interesting idea, but if you go to g2, then queen e4 check will trade off the queens. However, you can go to h2, and then you don't have a queen trade. However, after queen to f4, you have this queen to b6 move, which is just forcing white to play a move, and white has no moves. For example, you can't really move the queen, because just the king will gobble up the pawn, and if you try something like king to f1, then just check, and wherever the king goes, queen to e4 check will again trade the queens off. And if you try something like queen to d2 instead, then again it's queen b1 check, king to g2, and now queen to e4 with check. King g1 and queen e5 now guards the pawn and will pick up the g5 pawn finally. So this is why Harikrishna decided to give up the pawn right away. He played king to f1, and now Magnus just gobbles it up with the king. And also now he has queen to g7 check, which he goes for. queen g7 check, we have king to f5, and now queen to h8. Going after the h5 pawn, but Magnus now just doesn't care about this pawn anymore. He gets king to e4 in, he wants to get the king to c2, again with the weird arrows, and start pushing his past d pawn. So queen captures on h5, but now king d3. We have queen to h7 with check, king, and now queen e4, just blocking. So queen to h6, and now king to c2, and queen to c6 check now. However, now I don't even need to ask you to pause the video, because of course you all see the winning idea without even pausing. So congratulations everyone, and now you just block check and deliver check. So it's a block delivering check move. And now it was of course in this position on move 85 that Pentala Harikrishna resigned the game, and a very nice victory for Magnus Carlsen. And of course here you resign, because after captures and captures you now just have a passed pawn, and white has no way of dealing with this. You are too slow to even start consider pushing your pawns, and after this and this the pawn just now promotes to a queen, and it's a very straightforward win. So yeah, after this queen to c4 check, Harikrishna resigned, and wow, I mean, what a game. So he had that one moment, well actually two moments. He could have sacrificed that rook for two pieces and have pretty much a winning game, but he didn't spot it. After Magnus played bishop to a4, there was rook captures on a4 and then queen to a7, but you have to take advantage of the opportunity that the world champion presents you. So, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Alexandra Adorno, Hanna Tomashke, Ganesh Sashadri, Chris Sides, and Philip Rafik for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Chessable Masters, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and of course, whatever else happens in the chess world. So, thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day, and do check out the 2 links in the description below. See you soon.